a bit of a chat with some amazing people about ethics and AI, which is a subject that we don't see a huge amount of when we consider the use of AI in service management. So this is a good sort of opener, I think, a frame, an opener to what we'll see for the rest of the day. So we're going to welcome today's first guests, Kate Vredenburgh, Assistant Professor at the Department of Philosophy, Logic and Scientific Method, and Dr. Thomas Ferretti, Guest Lecturer in Moral and Political Philosophy at London School of Economics. So welcome both, and I think we're going to turn our cameras on for this, which is a really exciting time where we all sort of appear. Thank you for joining us today, guys. And I'm just going to put that on. Hopefully that'll work. There we go. Brilliant. Look at that. Seamless, actually. You could almost say we practiced that, couldn't you? Didn't that look amazing? Amazing. Good. So welcome, guys. Thank you for joining us today. And this is, I think, one of the first types of chats that we've done like this in relation to a subject matter as an opener. Normally we go straight in presentations, we talk about best practice. So this is a really good opener, I think, for us. So we've got a series of questions and points that we're going to talk about in relation to ethics and AI, right? And I want to start, I always ask experts, because I'm certainly not an expert in this. I'm learning every day, right, about this stuff. And I always ask experts, the first question is, how do they define AI and machine learning? What is it? How do you define that? Because I think it's in some cases, quite a grey nebulous thing. When people talk about AI, it could mean anything. So how would you define AI and machine learning? And maybe Kate first, if that's okay.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's an important one because there's a lot of sort of hype in this area, of course, but a lot of the ethical issues are raised not just by your sort of fancy AI, but by the everyday algorithms that you could implement, even kind of simpler versions. So the way that I think about machine learning is a kind of subset of AI, and AI is really about going from data to trying to find underlying patterns in that data in an automated fashion, such that you can then use the model that you've generated on that basis in order to do things like make predictions or classify individuals in a certain way. Yeah, so it's really about the kind of learning component of AI that I think makes it really special and very interesting and raises all these new ethical questions for us.
Yeah. And Thomas, I don't know if you want to add to that at all. I've been looking at the simplest form of this recently, and one sort of video watched and I think it was from some institute somewhere, was very intelligent, articulate people, just said that it was software written by people, and it's like, do you know what? It is. I don't, Thomas. Is that too simple, or is that pretty much it?
Yeah, well, I agree with what Kate was saying, and also with this general comment that basically AI is a kind of software. It's a kind of knowledge of specific techniques like machine learning, data analysis, and as a form of knowledge, my view is that it's neutral. So whether it's good or bad will depend on how we will use this in the world, and so this raised ethical questions, but not necessarily fundamental ethical questions about whether AI is intrinsically good or intrinsically bad, but more consequentialist questions about what are going to be the effects of AI and how we use AI.
It's interesting because I think that obvious good or bad thing is as a human, one of the first things that people sort of think. How it's going to affect them. Is it good? Is it bad? Which is really interesting, actually. I tell you what, we're going to run our first poll if we could, Holly. Now, we've got a couple of polls in this conversation, and they're related to the subject matter. So, Holly, if you could launch the first one, if that's okay. And there it goes. Okay, hopefully you can see that. Now, this is a question about your organization in the senior sort of position in the organization, their approach to artificial intelligence and machine learning, right? So as you can see there, the answers are, yeah, it's core strategy. We're already investing. It maybe not there yet on the next one, just looking at the potential, we're investing soon. We're going to move into it. It's on our radar, we're exploring the benefits, or it's not on the radar. So if you could just give that a click and sort of let us know where you are in your organization right now. That will be superb, and that'll frame another couple of questions that we go on to actually. So we're up to 53% voted. We're going to give it another 10 seconds. And if anybody's having any issues with hearing this, if you could just let us know in the commentary, please. I can see that Mohammed there's got problems hearing. Not that I'm aware, Mohammed, right? You might not even hear that actually. Right, we're up to 63%. Another couple of seconds, and we'll close that, please, Holly. and we'll show that too. So hopefully everybody will be able to see that, hopefully. Can you show that, Holly? There we go. If you can't see that, guys, I'm going to read them out. So 43% of our listeners today are already investing in AI and machine learning. 37% are looking at the benefits, exploring it. There are 15% who are just about to move into it, and only 6%. So that's quite a majority. It's quite a lot of people there that are already engaged with AI, which is incredible. And that comes on to what we're going to talk about, now actually. How do you think automation will change customer service in the future? Let's talk about that first, maybe, right? What are the major ethical issues as these organizations are putting these things in? What are the major ethical issues that arise? Thomas, Kate, either one of you would like, if you'd like to start, and that would be brilliant. Let's go for Kate. Sorry, I should have pointed. Let's go for Kate. Sorry. Or Thomas, either one, guys.
I think, as Thomas said, huge opportunities, but as you rightly brought out, really some kind of ethical risks and concerns that we need to be thinking through very proactively. So on the one hand, I think it's really going to continue to drive this data economy that we see. So, intelligent service really relies on having both a lot of data about customers and also reliable data about customers. And this raises, of course, really serious privacy questions, both about an individual's data and also what we learn about types of individuals using these data. There's also, a thing that Thomas works on and really is an expert in is what's going to happen to people's jobs. So are people's jobs going to be replaced, or are people's jobs going to be changed? Will AI be helping them do their job better, or will they see it as a kind of impediment, really a friction in their job, which often is what happens. Major kind of issue too is bias. So if we're not careful, we've seen tons of examples how AI can kind of learn from the worst of us and reproduce problematic bias. So how can we prevent that bias from happening? And I think all of these kind of opportunities or issues come about as you said, David, because the kind of great thing about using AI or any kind of predictive tools, we can be predictive, not reactive, right? We don't have to kind of wait for, say, a customer to come to us. We can go out and find new customer groups. And this raises, some ethical real upsides, right? We could think about greater inclusion. Maybe there are populations of people that we've overlooked for bad reasons, and we can use these tools to identify and reach them.
Yeah, that's great. Thomas, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would jump on this and talk more specifically about automation. I think, of course, it's difficult to predict how the market will evolve, but in any new wave of innovation and automation, it leads to creative destruction. So some old, outdated business model are replaced by more productive ones. And this can generate collective benefits. So it's important not to be too worried about innovation and the changes that come with it, because of course it does create collective benefits. If we look at past innovations like electricity and so on, of course, this has created enormous benefits for everyone. But during the transition, when there is this creative destruction going on, there are inevitably winners and losers. And so it's important to make sure that we build systems to compensate the losers, to share the gains of productivity with everyone. And this generally happens at the macro level. There's not that much that individual businesses can do in this. It's really some collective effort that is needed to have some redistributive mechanisms in place to redistribute the gains from the winners to the losers, participate in our shared responsibilities to collaborate with the government and pay taxes, for example, and therefore design policies to pay for unemployment benefit, retraining, making sure that we invest in the labor market to make sure that people have alternative options when they lose their jobs. These are the kinds of things that we can do together to kind of smooth the transition that is created by creative destruction.
Interesting. And you raised the point there actually about how far-reaching this kind of technology will become. And there's a question there about the responsibilities of private sector in managing market disruptions. So you'll have two sectors trying to do the same thing, for whatever reason. So government, local government, whatever, in public sector and private. So what do you think about that? What do you think about the responsibilities of organizations then, private sector organizations managing market disruptions as a result of this?
Yeah, I think that's a crucial question to ask, because one way to think about this is that there's a kind of division of labor between the governments and businesses. And of course, governments have a role in coordinating large-scale responses to market disruptions, right? So general public services, redistribution, unemployment benefits, retraining, and so on. But there's also a responsibility of businesses in managing market disruptions. And to understand this, I think it's interesting to think about the kind of implicit morality for why we have markets in the first place. So markets are a very efficient tool to allocate resources. That's their main benefit. But if we want markets to work efficiently, we need to make sure that we avoid market failures. And there are a bunch of market failures that can lead to massive inefficiencies. So in the tech industry in particular, there are monopolistic tendencies or anti-competitive behavior that can really reduce the efficiency of the market. It's also important to be transparent and to avoid deception of customers, for example, because this could lead to asymmetries of information. People could not get the benefits or the service they want as a result. And it's important to avoid creating costs for third parties, so externalities, by externalizing some cost to society. And one major cost or externality of automation is unemployment and market disruption. Yeah. And so it's important for businesses to kind of take an active part in this, collaborate with governments to have a collective response to that.
Do you want to add anything to that, Kate? Because that's a comprehensive answer there. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, just to stress Thomas's point that it's really due to this division of labor and the kind of primary job is on government to mount a large-scale response, that businesses really have an active role in supporting what governments decide. So, if the EU wants to have stronger privacy protections, it's not the role of businesses. They shouldn't be kind of undermining those choices by, say, lobbying against those privacy protections or trying to, as Thomas said, implement, design choices to maybe secretly undermine, right? Sure, we've got GDPR, but no one's going to actually read through all those cookie choices and click through the ones in order to opt out. So maybe the kind of good faith way to support governments is to really make sure, okay, it's probably a kind of opt-in if you want to have more data sent about you. So it's working with and also really supporting and being led by the choices of governments.
It's really, really interesting. And the more you dig into it, the more that, this isn't maybe the typical thing that we think about in service management, about those kinds of ramifications. Let's maybe talk about then the customer and all this, right? And customer service, because that's predominantly, if you look at what we do in the organization right now, that's what we do. We support the customer, and that experience of the customer is a very important part of that. And the customer could be anybody. It could be an employee, it could be a business, B2C, whatever, right? Does the use of AI for customer service specifically need to be transparent? There's a lot of talk about transparency and accountability in sort of and fairness, right? In all this, to what level does that transparency need to happen, and do they need to be transparent? Kate?
Yeah, I think transparency is really important, and it's important for a few reasons. So if you think about customer service, there can be this kind of picture of, customers come to the internet with these preformed, very, very strong preferences for the products and services they want. And then, customer service is just about channeling them neutrally towards the right kind of information. And I think this is, not the right way to look at it, even if you go back to advertising, right? The point of advertising is to shift customer preferences, or kind of take what's maybe a fuzzy preference, like I want some shoes, and make them realize, like, oh, these are the kind of shoes that would give me the most value. But if customers aren't aware that a lot of data is being taken about them, but being used to shape their preferences, then this could be potentially manipulative or kind of autonomy undermining. And it's also going to, you think, kind of undermine maybe the effectiveness on these tools on the other hand, right? If customers don't know why they're getting the recommendations they're getting, maybe they won't take them that seriously. So we've got these kind of like twin worries that pull in different directions, a kind of manipulation worry, if it's too effective, but actually maybe if it's not transparent, it won't be effective enough because the customer's like, I don't really know how to engage with this automated customer service. It's different from what I'm used to. And so because I don't understand the system, I as the customer can't get full benefit out of it.
Interesting. Thomas, do you know add anything to that? Because there is a question in relation to that sort of, human-centered designer on that. Because you're absolutely right. Because you could look at that, and I, I think all of us do. Remember well, if you're old enough, what spam used to be when sort of this stuff first year, spam was like the I don't know, the worst form of sort of marketing, but you could almost see that link is actually, it's still happening, but it's going to happen in a slightly different way. So people will, you're right, distrust it, not use it. I do that now. Honestly, I do that now. If I see something come up in a feed, I go, yeah, well done, nah. You know what I mean? I do that now. So let's maybe, Thomas, do you want to add to that at all, or do you think that's covered that one?
Well, very quickly, perhaps on transparency, I think one important aspect, as Kate mentioned, is that we go to service companies to get a particular service or a particular benefit, and so making sure that people know what they get, right, from an exchange, make sure that all parties are satisfied with what they get is really at the core of what market exchange is, and I think that's one reason why transparency is so important in business.
And I'm wondering, you see, what we do in IT, where we've got, or any part of the organization, where we've got structures and governance models in place, where this kind of stuff naturally fits into those, right? So if we're in IT, we've got IT service management best practice, whether that actually fits into it, and we can incorporate that very easily, or it'll just work somewhere in an organization on its own and be uncontrolled. And just as you said, all this wonderful data scientists running around sort of thinking this is great. Yeah, so it's very, very interesting. And I don't know when we'll see that sort of thing becoming a thing. Maybe it's now, I don't know, especially with 43% people saying they're already there. Let's run the second poll if we could. I'm conscious of time, guys. Let's run the second poll if we could, Holly. And this one is a really good question, actually, in relation to, all right, we've seen 43% of people, right, of the listeners that are already investing, right, serious investing. So this question is about how important, or the priority that you are giving ethics to the implementation of AI and machine learning in your organization, right? So there's top, secondary, or low. So as part of that, as part of what you're doing there, is this something that you're actually giving a top priority to? And if you can just give that a click, we're up to 38%. So we'll leave it a little bit longer, guys. And there is definitely a standout sort of winner. I don't know if is that right word for this kind of stuff. I don't know at the minute. We're up to 52%. Let's give it another few seconds. We close on 60, 65. And we're almost there. And we'll go with that, Holly. Thank you. So if you can show that as well, which is really interesting. Actually, I didn't know what to expect in this one, but as you can see there, 72% of the listeners say that ethics and machine learning is their top priority. That's incredible, because I'm looked at the list of people who attended today, but my assumption is they're all IT people. So that's really interesting. And then secondary and 25% and 4 low. Have you got any commentary on that, Thomas? Have you got any thoughts on that? What you see there?
Well, one thing that might be interesting to point out is that we all have values that we think are important, and so clearly in our mind, ethics often has a high priority. But then what exactly ethics mean, there's the disagreement and debate about this. And so some have a more demanding, some have a less demanding conception of ethics. And another thing that's important to mention is that efficiency is also a value, right? So sometimes we put ethics and efficiency as two conflicting things, but efficiency is something that we should value. We have good reasons to value efficient businesses.
Yeah.
Create benefits for society, and so sometimes we need to put efficiency in the balance in our ethical evaluation.
Yeah. And you know, we've spoken before about this, and that's a really important thing. So you've got that one end of what people understand value is in relation to the investment at the top level, and then understand what this really means as well, and trying to trade off or weigh up efficiency. So if an organization is looking to drive efficiency through their systems, to what degree does that impact on the way that they ethically manage the systems and develop them? And I don't know, have you guys seen, what are you seeing out there in relation to that? When you're engaging with organizations, is there the balance? Is this becoming a subject matter that's becoming more core to the way that organizations are developing this kind of stuff? What are you seeing, guys? Maybe Kate.
I think so. Yeah, I think it's in part because organizations are recognizing, as Thomas said, that kind of efficiency is internal to ethics, that often good ethics is good for business and indeed will help you kind of grow in the right ways, that, kind of you might get short-term gains from unethical actions, but particularly given the kind of stress on ethics now in industry and the increasing standards and expectations, it's really going to be harmful for growth in the long run.
Yeah, we're gonna cover off algorithmic bias. All right, we talked about bias a lot as well recently. There's an awful lot of that around. How would you explain what is algorithm bias? How does it arise, and how can we prevent it, Kate?
Yeah, so I think there's a kind of, if you think what is bias in the statistical sense, it's some kind of inaccuracy, right? We've got data such that either we're missing some data about certain kinds of people, or we've got kind of misleading data, we've drawn the wrong conclusion such that we're making bad predictions. And this is a kind of important sense of bias, but often what we mean when we're really concerned about algorithmic bias is that actually, in some sense, this tool might be making good predictions, but those predictions are going to have differential impacts on groups. And in particular, it's going to have kind of worse impacts on groups that are historically marginalized. It's going to be discriminatory. Now, why might this arise? I think people tend to focus on the kind of implementation of the algorithm, which is really important. So they tend to focus, rightfully so, on, have we undercounted some people, say, in our data gathering? Do we not have data about people from a lower income class because maybe they don't have a smartphone, or they're kind of primarily engaged in customer service on their smartphone. We're just not reaching them for some reason. But you can also have problems of over-inclusion of certain people in a data set, and this can be problematic as well. But I think, too, bias can also really arise because of what, first of all, is the goal of your product. So you might think, well, if you've got, a goal of a product that is benefiting certain groups but harming others, then this can be a kind of unintended way that bias can arise. If you think, okay, I just want to give loans to the most, the people most likely to pay them back, and not give loans to anyone else. You might think, well, the people most likely to pay them back already have a bunch of wealth, right? This is already benefiting them. So you meant to do good with the kind of goal that you had with your product or your kind of customer service purpose, but maybe you've missed the ways in which this could negatively impact other groups. As well as you might think about the kind of policies that we put around customer service and how those policies, affect it. Okay, so what can we do? I think explainability and insights into our systems and how they work is a really, really big one. So often the problem is we just don't have the data to know whether groups are differentially impacted. And I think unless we start actually collecting these data and doing the analysis, you just won't have good grounds to say whether your system is discriminatory or not. I think, too, it also requires a lot of contextual knowledge. So it could be that the kind of designer or the IT service professional coming from a certain context might not be sensitive to the way in which, say, advertising that I might ignore might be predatory or harmful for some groups, right? It might be fine for me to kind of, I don't know, spend all my extra income on shoes. But if you're leaning really heavily on a group who doesn't have that kind of liquid income, and you're encouraging them to do so and get into debt, this could be negative. So understanding the context of your customers is really, really crucial, alongside collecting that data and monitoring. I think these are just some key, very simple steps, but they're often just not implemented. So in a way, we don't even understand the scale of the bias problem right now.
Mm-hmm. It's very interesting. And again, conscious of time, we just finished, which is a shame, because I think this is a really interesting subject, I think, for everybody working in IT service delivery. So let's just finish with that just on the back of that one, right? How do organizations ensure the systems that incorporate AI and machine learning are inclusive, are equitable, that there is accountability, that there is transparency on the use of things like data? And I'm interested if there's frameworks and models out there already that can be adopted for those kinds of things, which I'm looked at, to be honest, but I'd be interested if you do know any. And certainly when we talked a little bit earlier about human-centered design, what that really means. How do we put humanity back into systems? And maybe Thomas, just to with those points and thoughts, maybe just maybe carry on from what Kate was discussing. How do we actually make it inclusive and equitable then?
Yeah, well, I think one important aspect, I agree with what Kate said about bias. One important aspect to make AI inclusive is to secure access, right? And so one way in which technology can lead to inequality or disadvantages is that some may have access to the benefits of a technology and others will not, and this will exacerbate already existing inequalities. So making sure that people have a wide access to the benefits of these AI services, it can be very important. And then beyond this, I think that it's important to mention that sometimes there's no technical fix to ethics or inclusivity. These involve value judgment and collective political choices. And one thing that the Facebook chief AI scientist Yann LeCun mentioned, so he's one of the pioneers of AI and machine learning and neural networks, is that there is no engineering fix or technical fix to problems of bias and inclusivity. What we need is a social debate involving, a diverse press and civil society to really make sure that we collectively set up the appropriate legitimate guidelines. So there are efforts in this regard. We can think of the UNESCO consultation on the ethics of artificial intelligence, the Partnership on AI, which also gathers a lot of big partners in the development of artificial intelligence. There is, of course, the European Union guidelines for trustworthy AI and the Montreal Declaration for responsible AI. So all of these frameworks, what they have in common is that they try to bring a lot of stakeholders to the table, to try to have as many perspectives as possible, to have diverse perspectives on the responsibility of businesses in the development of AI. And this gives some legitimacy to these guidelines. So I think they're interesting to check out.
Brilliant. Guys, that was superb. I really enjoyed that, and I think this is a subject matter that we'll continue to see, organizations like ours really invest time in and engage with people like you. So thank you for being part of today. And there is another slide. Hopefully everybody can see that slide. There is a slide, one of the handouts that you'll see on the download there from the console will show you where you can learn more about ethics and in AI from the London School of Economics and Political Sciences. It's an online masterclass, and as it says there, you can develop the tools and skills to practice ethical reasoning and manage the diverse impacts of AI on individual society. I'll be certainly looking at that. It's really, really, really cool. We have got a couple of questions. Thank you, Simone. Simone asked about, maybe before we finish, whether we can answer them now or not, or maybe they'll play into the rest of the day. Simone asked about what problems people are trying to think they're solving with implementing AI. I think I've got a couple of ideas about that, Simone. But if anybody wants to respond in the chat, by all means do. We'll cover that off as we go along. And there's another one there about the top priority and sort of wishful thinking over the reality of behaviors. And I think that comes back to what we were talking about, the ethics of large corporations, maybe, I don't know, bending the rules that aren't there at the minute. I don't know, right? So guys, thank you very much indeed. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for joining us, and hopefully we'll get a chance to do this again soon. So thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the invitation.
No worries at all. I'm going to put my camera off now. I don't even know if it's on. I can't see myself, but I'm going to put my camera off. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Good. Okay. All right then. So, what have we got next? Well, we've got another poll.